All right, welcome back. Continuing from where we left off last time. Last time we were talking about Maven dependencies and how to configure them, and we updated our dependency plugin. We added the dependency plugin to analyze our dependencies and make sure that we're not using things that we define or didn't define, and we are using things that we are or have defined. So to fix this problem, let's go ahead and actually use this Jetty server dependency, or at least start that process. So within tutorial API server, which is one of our Maven modules, let's go ahead and create a directory. Now Maven does expect you to follow a standard kind of layout when you're creating Maven modules, and you can see here Maven source directories that it's prompting. So let's go ahead and create a source main Java directory, and from inside here we'll create a Java package com.tutorial API.server. So com.tutorial API is basically our domain name but backwards, and then server lines up with the module that we're in. In fact, tutorial API server lines up with the module that we're in. So that's going to be our package for everything inside this this module. And actually I never did hit enter, so I have to type that again. New package com.tutorialapi.server. Alright, so now we have our module in here. I'll go ahead and close these palms. In fact, before I go further, let me go ahead and commit those palms. Git status. Well, the question is, should I commit these palms since it doesn't actually compile at this point, right? We ended on a failure because we're not actually compiling, or because we're not actually using this jar. I'm going to go ahead and commit them anyway, just because I'm the only developer on this project, so it doesn't really matter. But like if I was at work and the last thing I would do is commit code that was broken, that didn't actually compile. I don't want to break the build for everybody. But in this case, I am everybody for this project at this point, so I'll go ahead and git add these, git commit dash yeah. I'll just flag it with broken. Fingers aren't working. Add dependency, analyze, validation. All right, so now we pushed up our changes from last time, and we'll go ahead and get started with ours. Now notice it didn't ask about this directory because it's empty. Git by default doesn't manage empty directories or directory trees. So there's nothing in here to manage, and so it ignored it, even though this directory has been created now. So let's go ahead and create a new Java class. This is going to be our entry point into the server that runs our Jetty server. So I'm going to call this tutorial API server. Okay, so just for now, I'm going to create a public static void main method, which is our entry point, and just do system.out.println hello world. Okay, so we have our first class. It's our first Java code in this tutorial so far. So it's taken a while to get this far, but we've made it here finally. So we've got our first class. It has a public static void main method. I'm not going to go into the details of the Java programming language in particular and like what these keywords mean and everything. My assumption is that you have some basic understanding of Java as a programming language, so I'm going to skip that very beginner things. So we have a main. IntelliJ gives us these little play buttons, so we can play this whole class, which really just has this one method in it, or we can play the method itself. So it doesn't matter, you get the same behavior from either one. So I went ahead and clicked play. It's building. It's complaining about version things because I didn't actually configure IntelliJ for this project. So let me come up here to IntelliJ file, property structure. Okay, I do have version 17 here. I have SDK default 17 here. So this part looks pretty good. What I don't have in Maven is, let me create a java.version property, call that 17. Jump down to the compiler and add, is it, I think it's just source and target. Go. So my source version is going to be version 17. That's what what version of Java the source code is written in. And the compiler, when it generates classes, it's going to use version 17 classes. So it's not going to like downgrade the classes to older versions of Java. Everything's going to be 17. So now that I've updated this Maven configuration, I'm not sure if those warnings actually were caused by that or not. Let's go ahead and hit this play button again and see if that fixed it. Okay, that did fix it. So now we get, this very first line is a bunch of class path stuff that we can ignore. And then this line is what we printed in our output. And then the last line is the exit code of running this command. So everything ran just fine, no issues here. We got our hello world output. So that was kind of our first just get up and running. And by doing that, I now have this tutorial API server up here in my run configurations. So I can just hit this run button or debug button, which we might do in the future. Okay, so now that we have a main up and running, let's go ahead and start typing in some of our Jetty configuration to get our Jetty server, at least some classes used to get rid of our dependency error that we're setting up here. So when we're defining our Jetty server, there's a few things we need. The first is going to be an HTTP configuration. And actually it's kind of a misnomer because the class is called HTTP. We're going to be using it for HTTPS, secure HTTP. So we'll call it HTTPS configuration. And we're going to set the secure scheme. I think there's an HTTP scheme, dot HTTPS. Okay, so this is how we turn our HTTP connector into a secure connector. Now, this variable here is statically defined, so I'm going to add a static import for that just to keep my code a little bit shorter. And I see the import was automatically added up here. And I see that this line didn't actually disappear. So let me go into File, Preferences. Let me search for Optimize and Auto Import and check this box. So optimize imports on the fly. That way, if I change something, it will automatically clean up my imports for me. I don't want unused imports. Yeah, so it just cleaned up those imports and got rid of that one that wasn't used. I don't want unused imports hanging around in the code. I don't care about like wildcard imports or anything like that. I let IntelliJ's default configuration manage that stuff for me. I pretty much don't look up here, but I don't want unused things up here. Okay, so we're not really doing anything, but we are now using a couple of Jetty classes. So let's rerun this build and see if that error from before goes away. Okay, it did not, which I'm actually surprised about. Oh, so in this case it says HTTP. So this is actually a different error from before. Before, it was complaining that we have an unused declared dependency. So it was saying that we weren't using this. Now it's saying that we have a used undeclared dependency. So Jetty HTTP has this class here, this HTTP scheme. So I'm now using a dependency that I haven't defined in my POM. Now I can still see it, right? This code built just fine. I'm not getting any errors in here. So I can see this dependency because it's a transitive dependency of Jetty server, right, which is one that I have defined. I've got Jetty server in here. I don't have Jetty HTTP. So this plugin is doing exactly what I want. If I do use classes that are in dependencies that I can see transitively, then I need to include them. So let me add Jetty HTTP. Rerun this Maven clean install. I don't need to keep running the clean. And these builds will be very slightly faster if I don't clean first, because any code that I haven't changed won't be recompiled. But at this point, with only one Java class, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, so that fixed it. All my dependencies look good. It recognized, this is what the verbose flag did in my Palm. Like, it's now printing out this verbose dependency usage information. So now it says, yeah, you're actually using both of your declared dependencies in your code. So now that we fixed that error, I'm going to go ahead and git add. So yeah, we've got our new Java class, and we've got our updated Palms, which have the updated dependency information, and our top level Palm has our updated Java compiler version information. So I say that we fixed the build and set compiler Java version. And git push origin main to push it on up. All right, so now we're all committed and everything. So we'll come back to this Jetty stuff in a few minutes, or the next video maybe. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and start getting logging configured. So we saw SLF4j last time as one of the dependencies that Jetty brings in. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it in also and start using it. So let's come over here to our Maven repository. Like you don't necessarily have to use SLF4j. Like, you could Google search, Java logging libraries. And there's a few of them. Yeah, Introduction to Java Logging would probably be a good one to look at. Log4j versus Logback, things like that. So SLF4j is basically a wrapping library that provides you an API, and then it will automatically, well, not necessarily automatically, but it will, you can have it use any logging infrastructure behind the scenes and not have to change the API. So we're going to use Logback for the low-level logging, but we're going to use SLF4j, simple logging framework for Java, to talk to Logback effectively. Hopefully that's not too confusing. So let's look for SLF4j API. So they've got some alpha versions here. They've got alpha and beta versions here. I've never used any of those. I generally don't really like using alpha and beta things. So I'm going to come down here to the most recent actual released version, which is 1.732. Just copy this. I'm going to add it to my top level Palm in the dependency management section. It's org.slf4j, which is alphabetically after org.eclipse, so I'll paste it in right here. Now, so I've got it in dependency management, but I also need to add it into my server where I'm actually going to use it. And since I have the version up here at the top level Palm, I don't need the version here. And potentially I should be commenting these, like used for logging, used for application server. Okay. Now, so from inside here, I should now be able to do private static final logger. Yeah, and I see some SLF4j classes. Okay, so I went ahead and created a logger for this class, and now instead of system.out.println hello world, let me do logger.info. So I have it logger all capitalized, it kind of follows the convention of static final things being all capitalized. I use the whole word logger just because this is the name of, the type of class that it is. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can not make it static. You can make it lowercase. Those details are not that important, but this is the convention that is kind of normal, but it's not a strong convention, so call it whatever. So yeah, now I mentioned like this, I'm using SLF4j, which is just the API for logging. So if I run this now, well, actually I can run it from here just by clicking play. Yeah, so I can use the API to do logging things, but there is no implementation found. So I mentioned SLF4j is the API that you can use on top of any other logging framework. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Logback Java logging library. Actually, I'm going to use Logback Classic. Alpha things here too, which I want to ignore. I'm just going to jump to 127 and copy this. And it's ch.qos, so ch comes up here. Go ahead and delete that comment. Now, for some reason, it includes this test scope. No idea why it does that, but we're not using test scope here. We'll talk about tests at some point in the future. But for now, we want to use this in compile scope so that this jar is available to our server when it's running. So I've defined the dependency management with the version. Now let's go into tutorial API server and define it up here as well. Now, just by virtue of having this dependency on the class path, SLF4j will be able to find it and know that it can be used. But we're going to run into the problem, like we're not using any of these classes, so our dependency plugin will complain that we've defined a dependency that we're not using. But first, let me go ahead and run and see what happens. Okay, I got the same warning because I didn't actually do a Maven reload. So I'll do that first and then run it again. Okay, so now we got our logging output. It's got a timestamp, including milliseconds here. Main is the thread. Info is the logging level, which I used, info here. This is the logger, which is what I passed in here. In this case, I passed in the class, which is com.tutorialapi.server.tutorialapi.server. So that's where this part came from. And then there's a dash, and then the message itself, which is what I actually passed in here. So the logging is working, but like I mentioned, if I come over here and do that Maven clean install, we should get a dependency error because we have defined a dependency that we aren't using in our code anywhere, which makes sense because this dependency isn't necessarily meant to be used in code unless you're going to configure it programmatically, but which we're not. We're using SLF4j library to configure it for us. So what I need to do is come up here in our top level POM, scroll down to our dependency section, and I'm going to add, so what did this say? It says unused declared dependency. So I'm going to add ignored unused declared dependencies. And I'm going to say ch.qos.logback : Logback Classic. So now we're telling the dependency plugin, it doesn't matter if you see this dependency that's declared but unused, just go ahead and ignore it. So now if I do this Maven clean install again, then we're good to go. So now we've got our logging, we've got it building, we've got our first use of Jetty classes, but we're not actually starting a Jetty server yet, and we haven't configured our logging at all. So we'll do those things in the next video. All right, thank you.